Welcome to the Clubhouse. Today's guest is Dr. Ben Rein. He's a neuroscientist from Stanford School of Medicine. He has amassed over 1 million followers across social platforms for his engaging and educational short videos on the human brain. We'll be diving into the mysteries of the human brain, the science behind dreaming, and some brain hacking tips. Okay, so let's get right into it. Now, you're well known for debunking a lot of these bogus claims on your TikTok.
He's going to prove that soda is bad for you.
Can you tell us some of the most common myths you hear about our brains, and can you debunk some of them for us?
Absolutely, it would be my pleasure. So there are several very prominent neuroscience myths. The most common by far, I think, is probably that we only use 10% of our brain. I love Stephen King as an author. He's my favorite author, but I'm pretty sure he is responsible for this when he came out with Carrie. And there's just been a bunch of movies and books that say that if you can unlock the rest of your brain, then you can have telekinetic powers and things like that. Ultimately, every bit of tissue in our brain is extremely energetically expensive to run. The brain uses a lot of the body's energy. And so if we were only using 10% of it, the body would be wasting a ton of energy on just empty space that's not doing anything. So not only do we use 100% of the brain, but the brain can be divided into hundreds of smaller areas, and each of these subdivisions of the brain all have intricate responsibilities. If we were using just 10% of the brain, it would probably just be the brainstem, which allows you to breathe and control your basic bodily functions, and we would be basically zombies. So you definitely want to be using 100% of your brain, and luckily you do. Another really prominent brain myth is this whole lateralization idea that you can be left-brained or right-brained. I would like to see more studies on this, but there is one study on this. They looked at resting state brain imaging from about 1,000 people and basically asked the question of, when people are just hanging out, do they have more activity on one side of their brain? Can they find evidence to support this left brain, right brain idea? And the answer to that is people did not show preference for activation in either side of their brain. What they did find is that certain parts of the brain, which already do show lateralization, like smaller subregions, were more active on the left side or the right side. So for example, if you're right-handed, and so you're used to coordinating movements with your right hand, you might show increased activation on the left side of your brain, the part of your brain that controls your right arm, while writing. Or if you're speaking, you might show increased activation in the left side of your brain because that's where many of the prominent language areas are. So at the small sub-regional level, you might see an increase on either side of the brain, but overall, there's no evidence that people can be left-brained or right-brained. Now, a third and final brain myth is the Mozart effect. And it's this idea that if we play classical music for babies, then it can make them smarter. Yeah, I would not say that playing Mozart for your baby will make them smarter. I also don't think that playing Mozart for an adult will make them smarter necessarily. But there is some interesting data to suggest that playing music in general for newborns, there's a study where they were looking at preterm infants versus full-term infants. And when a baby is born preterm, they often show changes in brain function. So namely lower functional connectivity between different brain areas. And what this means is that brain areas may normally work together and activate at the same time, but those connections are not quite as strong in babies when they're delivered preterm, which makes sense because a lot of brain development occurs in the womb. So when they come out early, they have this immature brain development. So what they did was they played music, sort of like harp music, instrumental music, for infants newly born into the neonatal intensive care unit. And so they had preterm infants, they played music for half of them, didn't play music for the other half. And what they did is they did this repetitively for 5 days a week, for several weeks. And after, when the babies were about to be discharged from the intensive care unit, they did functional brain scans. And what they found was that this functional connectivity that I described, that is normally a bit deficient in preterm infants, was actually increased in the babies that received the music treatment, I suppose. And specifically, this salience network, which sort of are these parts of your brain that attend to stimuli around you, that network was more well connected with other networks, like sensory motor networks and the frontal network and the auditory network. So certain brain areas always work together. And when you see that those brain areas are activating at the same time as other brain areas that work together, that can mean that those brain areas, that those systems of brain areas are more functionally connected. They are working together to perform some task. So essentially what this suggests is that preterm infants, by playing music for them, you may be able to enhance the development of brain areas that just sort of attend to the world around them and integrate that information with other brain areas to sort of start making decisions.
Okay, so let's talk about brain hacking for a second. Now, I've read a lot of research about how brain training games like Sudoku and crossword puzzles can be beneficial to your brain health. So I'm curious to know if there are other ways we can do to improve our brain health, optimize our performances.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a really popular topic right now. Everyone's always looking for ways to improve their capacity for cognition and everything. Just people want to get smarter. So you always need to start from a healthy base. Get good sleep. Exercise is critical. There's tons of evidence that exercise, physical exercise, can induce neuroplasticity. That is, really an agent for change in the brain. So if you want to be learning things, if you want to have an active brain, it's going to be important to exercise. And with that, I'm not talking about you don't have to run a marathon every day. I always encourage people to consider what they're doing right now and maybe step up one level from that. So if you're spending all day sitting at your desk, maybe consider going for a 15, 20-minute walk if you can. If you're already, jogging, maybe try adding something new. Maybe try swimming or hiking or something like that. And if you're already powerlifting every single day and jogging for 2-3 hours a day, then you've probably met your maximum. So I'm sorry to say there's not much more you can do. The brain is like a muscle. There's all these different subdivisions of brain areas that all do different things, just the same as you have a body with all different muscles that all do different things. So if you go to the gym and you exercise your calves, it's not necessarily going to make any impact on your biceps or your upper body. The brain is very much the same in that if you're exercising your brain, you want to strengthen your brain, because it is like a muscle and that it strengthens based on its use. You need to target all different muscle groups of your brain. So doing something like Sudoku puzzles, doing something like crosswords, these will make your brain better at those specific tasks, and it will therefore make your brain better at performing similar related tasks that engage the same brain areas, but it's not necessarily going to make your brain better at everything. Just like I said, just like working out one muscle group won't necessarily help another muscle group. So what I encourage people to do is set yourself up with a healthy base, sleep, exercise, healthy diet, and then train your brain for whatever it is that you want to improve your performance at. So if you want to be better, if you want to expand your vocabulary, you want to be more eloquent when you speak, maybe practice, try reading, try doing crossword puzzles. If you really want to, you can study for the GRE or something like that, just sort of challenge your brain to help it grow in the direction where you want to go. If you want to become better at mathematics, practice mathematics, and don't necessarily expect that reading will improve your ability to perform mathematical calculations. Aside from applying your brain and challenging it with mathematical equations or reading or writing complex text, just think about the stimuli that you're putting into your brain all the time. So consider the social interactions that you're having. Are you sitting in isolation most of the time, or are you engaging in interactions? Are these interactions basic or are they complex? Are you meeting new people, or are you speaking with your spouse about boring everyday things? Also think about what are you engaging in? What are the activities that you're engaging in? Are you living a super repetitive lifestyle, or are you going out and exploring? Are you hiking, whatever? I'm not saying that you necessarily have to be always inputting information into your brain, but generally, if you're challenging your brain or stimulating it, you are going to be constantly growing. And I think that's also important for staving off things like Alzheimer's disease, keeping an active brain.
Do you have any tips for things like improving our memories or better eyesight?
As far as the vision hacks, so you can actually take advantage of the anatomy of the eye to better see in the dark, or at least better identify objects in the dark. In your eye, you have rods and cones. Cones are cells that allow you to detect, they're like HD cameras, like color vision, high quality. And then you have rods, which allow you to see better in dim lighting and are more kind of like low resolution cameras. In your eye, you have the fovea, which is the center point of your vision. So when you're staring at something and it's clear, that is the center of your eye, the fovea. And there's a extremely high density of cones there, which is why the area you're looking at is so clear visually. In the periphery, spreading out from that area, you have a much higher level of rods, which are the areas that detect images in low light conditions. The result of this is that actually your peripheral vision is better at seeing in the dark than your direct vision, what you're staring at. So if you're, let's say, walking in the dark and you hear a noise off to your side and you're not sure, your natural response is to turn and look directly at the spot and try and see if something's there, if there's a person there. But actually, the better thing to do is to look slightly off target of where you think it is, and your eye will be better able to detect if there is something moving in the darkness. So this only works in the dark. It's also, if you want to test this and see it in action. Actually, if you go outside at nighttime, you kind of sense that there's a star up in the sky. If you stare right at it, it'll appear much dimmer, versus if you look off target, it'll appear much brighter in your peripheral vision. Yeah, so it's not it's not an extremely helpful life hack. It might save your life if you're walking in the dark and someone's stalking you, I suppose, but it's mostly good for viewing stars.
Now, jumping into a different area, specifically about mental disorder, mental illnesses. So our readers are always interested in learning more about things like dementia, for example, or depression. So what exactly happens when people are suffering from depression?
The overall consensus is we're not entirely sure. One thing that we know is that SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, drugs that overall increase serotonin signaling in the brain, are effective for treating depression. We know that for sure. Now, that would imply that maybe a deficit in serotonin in the brain is an underlying cause of depression. On July 20th, a paper came out in Molecular Psychiatry. They analyzed scientific literature and they found that across all these big papers, there was no strong evidence at all for serotonin signaling being the root cause of depression. That doesn't mean that anything changes about the use of SSRIs for treating depression. There's potential that this news can make people less likely to use SSRIs. Please do not do that. I think that it doesn't need to be the problem to be the solution in the brain. There's so many systems in the brain that if serotonin signaling is not the problem, but increasing serotonin signaling can help, then there's no reason not to use that form of treatment. As far as the actual, so then what the heck is going on in depression? There's a bunch of evidence suggesting that there is reduced volume of certain brain areas, like the frontal cortex and the hippocampus. And why exactly these brain areas are reduced in size, we have no idea. But it actually has been shown that the use of SSRIs can increase the volume of some of these brain areas. Whether we're addressing the root cause, not really sure, but it certainly is at least addressing some of the issues that are being observed.
Now, in terms of preventative measures, do you think that there are ways that we can sort of prevent certain illnesses from happening, or is it just an inevitable that we're all just going to get it?
My advice is very straightforward and nothing you haven't heard before, but taking care of your body, taking care of your brain is going to be the best thing that you can do. So yeah, getting a healthy night of sleep, eating a healthy diet. There's evidence that yoga can actually reduce depression symptoms. You can also try things like mindfulness meditations, just sort of giving yourself breaks. I mean, generally living as healthy a lifestyle as you can. Work-life balance is important. Taking care of your mental health is important. Also, you want to avoid social isolation. Isolation can be a very bad thing, especially in the elderly, which is where it's most common. Engage with people you love and do things that excite you. I think a lot of us, we tend to fall into patterns of work, especially nowadays with the pandemic. The last few years we've been very isolated and it's just been kind of down to the bare bones of life. And I think it's important to maintain the things that excite you in your life and not get to fall into this repetitive cycle of boring kind of bare bones life. But the thing that's always going to be important is just keeping healthy habits, sleeping, exercising for sure. Exercise is one of the best things that you can do for mental health. And then again, yoga, things like that, mindfulness meditations can also make a big difference.
Now let's talk about dreams. Now, dream is such a fascinating topic because, there's a lot of research, but we still don't fully understand what's really going on with our brains when we're dreaming. Regardless of culture, it seems like there's this universal nightmares that we all have, like falling from the sky or our teeth falling out. One of the dreams that I keep having is being late for class, which is kind of strange because I haven't been to school in 7 years. So what is going on with our brains there?
So fun fact, I actually became a neuroscientist because of a horrifying nightmare I had, where I woke up and I thought, I can't believe that my brain can do that. And not only that it can generate all that imagery, but that I can be immersed in the experience without and seemingly conscious, walking around making decisions in this dream environment and not even being aware that my brain was also generating the experience. I was awed by the power of the brain, and that's why I became a neuroscientist. So I'm very interested in dreaming. As far as why we all have similar nightmares, there are a lot of people out there believe in theories like if you have, dreams of your teeth falling out, it means that you're worried about this or that. Neuroscience as a whole still doesn't entirely know why we dream. We know that many things occur during dreaming, like it helps memory consolidation, and it's very important. Of course, the REM stage of sleep is very important for restful and effective sleep, but we don't really know totally why we dream. And what's interesting too is that, all animals dream, as far as I know. At least many animals, I can say, confidently dream. We've all seen our dogs on the ground barking and twitching. But there's a theory of dreaming that it serves an evolutionary purpose. Dreams, or nightmares specifically, allow you to simulate threatening experiences. So by simulating something like you were saying, being chased, maybe through that simulation, by truly not knowing that it's a simulation and that you're fully engaged in that moment, because why else would we want to have this full arousal, right, where you're so filled with adrenaline that you actually wake up? Because your brain wants you to believe that it's actually real, so that maybe you can learn how to behave in that situation and prevent your death in that actual scenario. And so with this theory, it would make sense that years and years and years ago, back in the primitive days, these dreams would have served a very beneficial purpose from helping us in threatening scenarios like being hunted or attacked. But nowadays, the brain may have this deep primitive drive to simulate threatening experiences, but the demands of our daily lives have completely changed, where we're no longer being hunted by predators. Nowadays, we're sort of working on our reputations and we have jobs and things like that. So something like walking around in public naked 10,000 years ago would not have been a problem, but nowadays it would be a huge problem and it would be very damaging to your reputation. So these things have become our nightmares. It's like maybe this old system is now being hijacked by the demands of modern life to result in us simulating these experiences that are not really threatening for survival, but are just threatening and scary in general. I don't necessarily believe that dreams have an inherent meaning, that you being late for school means something, like your brain's trying to tell you it necessarily. But I do think that when you wake up and you think about it and you're like, what does that mean? And you assign a meaning to it, that's where the true value comes from, is when you wake up and you have that fresh perspective, you've just woken up and you decide what that dream might mean. It's you're almost sort of unlocking this deep, relaxed state where you can identify problems in your life by assigning this dream value to it, where normally you wouldn't have thought, oh, that's a problem. So I think insights can come from dreams, but I'm not necessarily sure that dreams themselves make sense or matter. And there's a lot of speculation that that dreams themselves are actually just random nonsense activity, and that we assign meaning to them sort of when we wake up.
I want to talk about this phenomenon called sleep paralysis. A lot of people describe it differently, which I found it very interesting. But based on people's account of it, it sounds really terrifying. So what can you tell us about that and what's going on there?
Well, to understand that, let me first explain something else, which are called hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations. So as the brain is falling asleep, you slowly descend into deep sleep and then come back up into REM sleep. And typically that process takes about 60 to 90 minutes. So there's an hour to an hour and a half buffer between you being conscious and you dreaming, which is why, there's such a distance. I'm not sure if you can remember your dreams. Some people remember them, some people don't. Personally, I remember them a lot. What happens in hypnagogic hallucinations is people who have a shorter gap between alertness, consciousness, and REM sleep. For example, in sleep condition narcolepsy, where you go directly into REM sleep, they will go from being awake to dreaming. And what can happen is in that process, you can begin to sort of start to dream while being partially conscious. And it's essentially like a stage of hallucination before you reach dreaming. These are called hypnagogic hallucinations. Fun fact, I actually have narcolepsy, and so I experience these all the time. So I've experienced a lot of hypnagogic hallucinations. They're definitely pretty wild. That is less common because in order to go directly into REM sleep, you need to have some sort of condition, like a sleep condition. I'm sure many people do experience hypnagogic hallucinations, but it's much more common on the other end to wake up from a dream, right? This happens all the time. You can be stirred awake by a noise or some light. And when that happens, when you go from being in REM sleep to waking up, you can have the same thing occur on the other end, which are called hypnopompic hallucinations. And so what happens is in sleep paralysis, during REM sleep, when you're dreaming, your body is paralyzed. Your brain is intentionally disconnected from your body so that you're not moving around acting out your dreams, for obvious reasons, of course. When you experience this rapid shift from REM sleep to being conscious, it's possible that doesn't happen. And so you end up remaining body locked and paralyzed because your brain thinks, I'm still dreaming right now, but you are conscious enough to recognize that you are awake. And so this is where sleep paralysis occurs, is that you feel like you're awake, but you can't move. And so it can be definitely scary. That experience in itself is alarming, of course. But then to make matters worse, you can have hypnopompic hallucinations because your brain is still on the border between dreaming and awake. And so as a result, you're not only paralyzed, but you're also hallucinating. Because of the discomfort of paralysis, these hypnopompic hallucinations can be very unsettling and disturbing. And so a lot of people describe sleep paralysis demons, where they're not only frozen, but they're also being attacked by something. And so these are actually hypnopompic hallucinations, because really what's happening is the mysterious things happening in the dream world are leaking over into real life. And so it seems very real, but it's still really a dream. So that's essentially what's happening in sleep paralysis. And again, I experience this all the time personally, and it's definitely not a great experience. But luckily for me, my hypnopompic hallucinations are not scary. I don't have sleep paralysis demons. I just have sleep paralysis, like visuals and experiences. Like for me, I'll like wake up and I'm like, okay, I'm awake, and I roll out of bed and I like stand up, and then I blink my eyes and I'm still there. And it's just, I keep doing this, and it's actually very straining.
Wow.
So I like hallucinate the experience of getting up out of bed, but then it never actually happened, and I go back and I just keep doing that for at least, a few iterations. And then eventually I sort of have to tense my body up enough where I do get out of it, I break out of it, and I stand up.
This ability to control your dreams, or what we all call lucid dreaming, there's a lot of articles about how to achieve this. Exactly what's going on in lucid dreaming?
So lucid dreaming is a form of dreaming when you are aware that you're dreaming. And so you can control your dreams. And it's definitely a compelling idea, because who wouldn't want to be existing fully conscious in a world where you can control everything and you can fly and do whatever you want. The most common way I believe that people achieve a lucid dream is they get in the habit of asking themselves, am I dreaming? Like right now, am I dreaming? No, I'm not dreaming right now. I might be, but I don't think I am. And you get in the habit of doing that, and eventually you will do that in a dream. You will ask yourself out of habit, am I dreaming? And then you realize, wait a minute, I am dreaming. And then a lucid dream ensues. Just a note, we don't really know, but lucid dreaming might be bad for sleep quality.
Oh, really?
I would personally recommend against lucid dreaming a lot. You definitely don't want to spend like your entire night in lucid dreaming, because it's such a conscious process. You've sort of achieved consciousness within your dreams. So it could be detrimental to the therapeutic properties of REM, the healing properties, the restorative properties, I should say, of REM. So I would just personally warn against doing it a lot. If you're like taking a 30, 40-minute nap and you're like, I want a lucid dream, sure, why not? But I think if you're spending like much of the night when you're sleeping in lucid dreams, if you're that good at it, that could be a problem. As far as what it actually is and what's going on, there's still a lot of research to be done. We really don't know. There's actually very little research that has been done. But a very interesting study came out last year in Current Biology. What they did is they had 4 research groups across the world all replicate this same setup, where they got a person who was really good at lucid dreaming. They put them in the lab, they had them fall asleep, and they hooked them up to an electroencephalogram to measure brain activity, and electrooculogram to measure eye movements. And they asked them to lucid dream. And they said, when you're lucid dreaming, move your eyes back and forth 3 times. And so they have this electrooculogram to read out those measurements. And the person did this, and they can confirm that via the EEG signals from the brain, this person actually was in REM sleep. And their eyes move back and forth 3 times to say, hey, I'm here. What do you want me to do now? And so the next thing they did was they asked the person a math question. I think it was like, what is 8 minus 3 or something like that? And they moved their eyes back and forth 5 times. And so not only did they do this, but a few other labs across the world were able to achieve something similar. It's a step in the direction of us now being able to study lucid dreams from the inside and actually ask a person a question while they're in the middle of a lucid dream. Does it help us understand the neurobiology of what's happening? No, not directly, but it does help us understand what's happening, and at least pairing those, being able to ask people questions in these dream experiences, being able to pair those answers with EEG signals measured from the brain might be able to lend some insight into what exactly is going on in lucid dreaming. I think a big question off the bat is the brain activity signature of someone in a lucid dream identical to someone in a non-lucid dream? And I think understanding that would start to get at that warning that I gave before of, is it harming the properties of REM sleep? And of course, also, I think studies should be done to see, is the quality of sleep impaired after lucid dreaming? I think that's an important one myself.
So before we go, I would like to know the top 3 mind-blowing facts about our brains.
So I'll start with the first one that's the most complicated because it's a bit of a story. People who have epilepsy, sometimes a seizure will start on one side of the brain and spread from there and eventually sort of bypass the midline of the brain and become a seizure that's throughout the entire brain, or at least a large portion of the brain. And in epilepsy, we don't want the seizure to spread a lot. So what sometimes happens is a procedure called a corpus callosotomy, where the corpus callosum, which is the tissue that connects the two hemispheres of the brain, will be severed. And this prevents the seizures from spreading. In people who have had a corpus callosotomy, something really, really interesting happens, which I think is like the most fascinating thing. When you're looking at the world around you, so let's say I have this pen here. When this pen is on my right side, my right visual field goes in and actually crosses over to my left occipital lobe. So everything, like there's actually an X in the brain where the optic nerve from either eye crosses and then goes backwards in an X formation. So I see this here, the information goes to my left side of my brain. I see this here, it goes to my right side of the brain. Now the language areas of the brain are on the left side. And so what will happen is if you have this pen right here, I'm looking at it, it goes into my right lobe. And then I'll say, if you ask me, what is this? The information from my right lobe goes to my left side of my brain, to my language areas, and I say, it's a pen. But if someone has had a corpus callosotomy and you place an object in their left visual field, the information goes to the right side. And since it can't cross the midline to go to the left side of the brain, they know what it is, they can identify what it is, they understand what it is, but they cannot speak aloud what the object is. So they know in their head, this is a pen, but the information can't get from the right side of the brain to the left side of the brain. So in order to get them to say it out loud, you have to move it to the midline or to the right side. I think that is just like the most interesting. It's like such a beautiful example of brain anatomy and function in practice in real life. It's just amazing to me. Now, a second brain fact that I think is really cool, and maybe a lot of people don't know, is that everyone's brain is like roughly the same wrinkly. You know, we all have a fingerprint. And so we all know that everyone's fingerprint is unique. And I think maybe because of that, people tend to think, okay, this wrinkle is unique on my fingertip and my brain is wrinkly. And so maybe my brain is a unique pattern, a unique signature of wrinkles. But that's actually not necessarily true. So in the brain, there are some major wrinkles, many major wrinkles that are identical across people. And they're actually used as landmarks for neurosurgeons and for neuroscientists. So on the outside, if you put your brain next to someone else's, it looks largely the same. There might be a difference in size, but that's more based on body weight and, overall size, not intelligence. Your brain does not get bigger if you're smarter, or vice versa. You having a bigger brain does not make you smarter necessarily. Yeah, on the outside, the brains between two people are very, very similar. The wrinkles are very similar. But actually what's interesting is that on the inside, if you look at the microstructure of the brain, meaning like the different connections between the cells and the placement of the cells, that is all entirely unique to your experience and your genes. So for example, if you play a tone and it activates a part of my brain, it activates, let's say, a set of 20 or 30 cells, the placement of those cells is not necessarily going to be the same as the 20 or 30 cells that are activated in another person's brain. They'll be in the same brain area, but they won't be like the exact same cells. So I think it's really interesting that we have this like big sort of general guideline for a brain, but then everything on the inside, like at the microstructure level, is very customizable based on your experience throughout your life. And then lastly, another great brain fact is the TRPV1 receptor. The bottom line of this receptor is that it is a heat sensor. It's a receptor found throughout your body and it senses heat. So of course, it's important to be able to sense heat. If you're stepping on something hot, or if someone holds a lighter close to your arm or something like that, you need to be able to have a quick way to detect that's hot. We have these all over our body to detect heat, but we also have them inside of our mouth. And the cool thing is that they're actually activated by spicy foods, by capsaicin. When people describe spicy foods as being hot, it's actually because it's the same receptor that detects heat. Even though it's a very different experience, of course, it doesn't really truly feel hot, but we describe it as hot. It's because it is hot. And we have these receptors in our digestive system, and we have them where the sun doesn't shine, so that when the food comes out, sometimes we also feel that spicy sensation as well.